I'll start with a couple of questions. This is obviously based on the classic 1939 short story by James Thurber. As there was a previous film which John Goldwyn's grandfather produced from 1947, starring Danny Kaye. Both that original film is very different from the short story, and this film is very different from that film and the short story. But could maybe you, Ben, and Steve talk a little bit about whether you found those two useful models at all, the original short story and the film?
Yeah, I mean, I came on relatively late in the process, but John and his dad really have had a long process of bringing the movie to the screen over many years. But basically, I think what happened was they tried for a long time to remake the original movie in some way, which didn't really in any way necessarily story-wise connect to the original short story. And at a certain point, Steve Conrad, and maybe you guys can speak to how it happened, came in with a totally different take on the story. And when I read that script, for me, that was what made me want to do it, because it felt so emotionally connected and relevant, because it got into the idea of who this guy was and why he was a daydreamer, and didn't try to redo what had already been done very well by Danny Kaye. And obviously, I couldn't do that. Nobody would want to see me attempt to do that. So I didn't want to attempt to do that. So anyway, it was. So that was really what was exciting to me, was that Steve took this idea, and I think it has the spirit of the original story and the character that Thurber created, which is it's obviously an iconic character. Yeah. I don't know, do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, I just want to say, is this working? Yeah. So when I got the call from Steve's agent saying that he would like to take a shot at this, I said, Steve Conrad, are you kidding? You would want to do this, really? Because I had such respect for Steve as a writer, incredible films that he'd written. And I remember my first conversation where he said, every American male yearns to be on the cover of a Wheaties box. And I kind of understood or intuited what he was saying. I don't know if I completely understood it, but I was so intrigued. And that began this process, this journey with Steve, that really came to complete fruition with Ben and Steve, about the movie that you saw. But it was, he really saw a kernel of an idea that was very different from the old movie and even different from Thurber's short story that was uniquely his own.
Thank you, John, very much. When I thought this was a challenge I wanted to accept, I was well aware that there had been iterations of the script for a while, and I thought I'm going to try to apply a greater challenge, excuse me, than just to turn the short story into a film. I began asking myself what Thurber might, if he were able to say more, what would he say next? And I started to write with that in mind, to continue rather than to translate or adapt. And primarily for me, that meant finding out more of what Walter's conditions might have been like before he began daydreaming. And it's a gift for a writer to find a story that might have the promise of drawing us all together. And our imagination is one of those tools that we all use privately to move our lives forward or to help deal with challenges, pain, and loss. And I thought to have the chance to be able to write about one of our most magnificent faculties, I couldn't let pass me by. And I was given great space by the rest of our filmmakers to experiment with it that I'm grateful for. I think it probably collectively it made the difference in this script being one that we were able to film.
Can you say a bit about the process of coming up with and integrating the fantasy sequences? Because there's, I imagine you had a lot of fun with that. There's often an element of the absurd to some of the fantasies, but there are also sort of a crucial function in terms of advancing the character, the narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was really one of the facets of Steve's script right off the bat, was the idea that the fantasies in Walter's head related to parts of himself, who he could be or who he wanted to be, as opposed to being a different character, just elements of who Walter was under the surface that hadn't been realized. And obviously we wanted to have fun with it and enjoy the idea of being able to be in different worlds and for the comedy to come out of it. But for me, that idea of like understanding how each fantasy leads him to becoming who he is and ultimately being able to realize his full self, that was really important. The challenge with it, which we found, and I guess it was in the first time around, you talked about this, John, when they were making the first movie, is that when you have fantasies that stop the story, an audience naturally wants to see the story unfold. So it's very challenging to keep the momentum going and to have the fantasies play out. So originally, we had envisioned these much more elaborate fantasies that went on a lot longer. And as we developed the script and worked on the script, we realized that we had to keep on paring them down. And that process sort of continued through the editing of the movie and finding that balance of how you could keep the momentum of the story going, but also having enough of the fantasies in there to give you a sense of what was going on inside Walter and just have fun. But we spent a lot of time, Jeff Mann and I and the whole team, envisioning all these crazy fantasies that we ended up having to cut, both for budgetary reasons. There was originally there was a fantasy that happened on 6th Avenue when Walter and Cheryl are sitting by the fountain, where he had this Lawrence of Arabia fantasy where Ted and all of the guys who work for Ted come galloping up on horses looking like Anthony Quinn, and they grab Cheryl and they ride the horses down into the subway, and they go through the subway and they come out the other side and they're in in the desert, and then they end up like doing they end up singing the end song from Grease, right? I don't know why we cut that. But it was money, basically. But that we just realized as we went along that we had to keep on paring it down. And then the other thing we learned in working on the story was that it was very important to focus on Cheryl and Walter and the connection that they had together, because there's very little time in the story to develop that relationship before Walter goes out into the world. And so it really became important to focus the fantasies on Walter and Cheryl, and Walter wanting to connect with Cheryl. And so we kept on working on that all the way through the process of making the movie.
Can I add one thing? What is such a big departure in Ben and Steve's version of the movie from the old Danny Kaye, even Thurber, is that right from the beginning, there's something about the man's yearning that's revealed in the fantasies. Whereas in the Thurber and even in the old Danny Kaye movie, it's about retreat. So you get the sense of a man who really wants to figure out a way to make a connection in Steve's version of the movie in a way that you never felt in any former iteration of the story.
Let's take some questions. Yep. We have microphones.
Lovely fantasies and a lovely film to watch. I wonder, you had all the world to choose from and as to where to extend the fantasies. I wonder why you chose Iceland and Greenland in particular.
I'll take a shot at that. The Walter coming out into the world should feel new to Walter, right? And then also, coincidentally, to the audience. And I just pushed myself to imagine a landscape that hasn't been shot, to death. Something that allowed us some surprise when you see the scope of it all. Something that, from a bird's eye view, might allow you the chance to recognize how big the world is. So it seemed like Iceland and Greenland were heretofore sort of undiscovered in that way.
Ben and Steve, there's such a respect for workers and friendships and how workers work together, and it sort of bleeds over to mom and son. Could you talk a little bit about how you made it very contemporary? It's this 30s kind of theme that is brought back in a very contemporary way with technology about workers in America.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's to me, was one of the great things about what Steve did, was that he put it in the context, besides getting into the idea of who the character was, he put it in this context of what's going on, I think, in the world today. And generationally, I think, for guys our age, living in a world, we're all living in this world that's really transformed from, analog to digital, or sort of in process of doing that. And what gets left behind with that. And I felt like that was a really important part of the whole telling of the story, was the idea of the permanence of the pictures and the real things, the actual tactile things, that's all going away, and now we don't buy CDs or albums, obviously, but we download things, and pictures, we are digital, and Walter's a guy who takes care of the actual physical objects, and he cares about that, and he cares about his co-workers and the process and all of that, and that was something that I think just gave it a context that was really, to me, was resonant, and worth thinking about today. And that was one of the things that Steve just did. He just did that. And the Life magazine idea, I think, was a great sort of way of encapsulating what's going on in the world in terms of downsizing, print journalism, magazines going away, and just sort of the process. Filmmaking process has changed so much. It's all changing and happening so much quicker. And I felt like even the pace of the movie wanted to sort of honor that too a little bit. Yeah, we wanted to try to create a world that was like, to me, it was sort of like, it was real, but it was sort of in its own world a little bit, and a tone that you felt like this all was kind of happening, but it kind of also, to me, had to like exist in a world where you could believe everything that happened in the movie happens, even if it's a little bit hyper real, maybe.
What was the most challenging thing for you as a director and actor in the same movie? How did you
I'll take this one.
Please.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Please answer a
felt like I
question.
needed to
We need to hear from you. Kristen Wiig, ladies and
Thank you
gentlemen.
very much.
Come on, she's awesome. Yeah, it's always not the most efficient thing. For me, I felt very fortunate that I had this incredible group of actors and creative collaborators and people that I could trust. And I think it comes down to trust, honestly. And you talk about it and you prep as much as possible and you try to have a plan going in. But then at the end of the day, when you get there, it's about just having the environment there that you can create the moments with everybody, and you trust the actors. I need to trust the actors. They need to trust me because they know I'm directing, but I'm also acting in the scene with them, so they need to trust that I'm actually watching them as a director. But if I'm watching them as a director while I'm acting in the scene, then I'm not going to be a good actor, and that's already challenging. So it's it's just one of those things where you get into a rhythm and you figure out as you go along, and you were great, and all the actors were so great in supporting that process, and then you just hire really great talented people, because that really is a huge part of it. Just when you hire the right actor, they're going to bring so much to it.
Actually, I do want to add something to that. I mean, you just saw this movie, and directing it alone looks like an incredibly impossible challenge, and just watching Ben do that and directing and being there as an actor and guiding everybody was really amazing to watch. I'm talking about him like he's not here. But it was really inspiring.
Well, I think everybody got on board with it too. We all watched a few movies together and talked about what we felt the tone of the movie we wanted it to be, and then so that was important too.
I'm curious what some of those movies were that you watched together.
Oh my gosh, he's like, let's watch Zoolander, let's watch...
let's watch it again.
Like The Cable Guy.
Watch every single one of the movies that I've directed.
They were all his movies.
All the blockbusters. Cable Guy. No, we watched The Apartment. We watched Being There. We watched just great movies that you always local hero movies that just were inspiring, and not necessarily in any way for anything specific other than just watching something good that gets you excited to try to do something, good too. But that bonding experience of just watching stuff together and hanging out and having a connection before you start, get on the set when there's pressure on, and it doesn't feel like just another job. You feel like everybody's in it and together.
A couple of those films you mentioned, actually, The Apartment being there, I think they're notable for being films that combine very different tones in successful ways.
Yeah, I mean, tone is, it's such a weird thing, because I think you can't really define it until it's almost like people talk about tone, and you have to talk about it when you're talking to the studio about what is it going to be funny, is it going to be real? You talk about all this stuff, but honestly, as a filmmaker, you don't know what the tone is going to be until you make the movie and you see it, and then then you get a feel for what works and what doesn't work, and you go for your best guess. But this one, I knew that we were going to have like comedy and also, sort of more serious stuff, but it was really finding that becomes part of what the editing is about. And I think ultimately every movie has its own tone, and if you try to do another movie's tone, then it doesn't feel original too.
The movie is both sort of a celebration of travel photography in a way, and also the travel log experience, even referencing Instagram as a way of documenting your trips. Did you do any of your own documentation, your own Instagram sending out? And did you regret, Kristen, that you didn't get to see Greenland, Iceland?
I did go to Iceland.
Yeah, she
you
came
did?
Twice.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh.
Even though it was a fantasy, she actually came.
Yeah, I was
All right. I want to hear about
there. Yeah, the whole bar scene was there, and was that it?
I mean, I took Instagram. I actually joined Instagram while I was there, and then when I got back to New York, I quit because I was like, I don't have anything interesting. I mean, New York's great, but I was inspired to take pictures in Iceland because everywhere you turn, like you go to work in the morning, it's like, oh my God, this incredible sunrise, and yeah, I mean, it's just incredible weather conditions there all the time. So that was actually really fun, and actually a couple of my little Instagram pictures are in the end credits too.
And also, did you study the photography as well of the life?
Yeah, we looked at it. Jeff, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was. We had access to the archives, the live photo archives, which were incredible and deep, and so many iconic images from my childhood, and seeing them in the flesh, and kind of holding contact sheets of Robert Capa D-Day photographs. It was pretty remarkable, and there's such a library of cover images that for us to choose from. It was really a challenge actually to curate the appropriate images that and determine when we were going to see them and how long they were going to be based on the blocking of how the blocking unfolded on the set that we created, and which images we wanted to have in the background for certain shots. And then when Walter makes the decision to go to Greenland and he runs down the hallway and kind of articulating what those images were and how they kind of escalated, and that these people that had such an impact on our culture and our humanity that are on the covers of these things. And kind of Walter's like a little bit self-important and a little bit kind of fantastic, and but also kind of reverential at the same time in that one moment. So it was it was arduous because there were so many things. It was like a wealth of riches. And then, of course, certain things weren't good enough for us, so we had to create covers with specific images because a lot of them were we could not find the high enough quality to print that big and
also
subjectively.
to relate to certain things in the story too, like to create covers that somehow, like a volcano or a shark or something that would somehow relate to something in the story
like
that
to
didn't exist.
Seed ideas that we would see later that would, if you connect the dots, it would have inspired Walter to start fantasizing some of the fantasies that he had. So it was an awesome and challenge to sift through all of that stuff.
It's also really fun too, like to look at all those covers, and just to look at Shirley MacLaine was on 3 Life covers, and at one point we thought, oh, would that be fun to put her on the wall? But
considered it for a while there.
Yeah.
We have time for a couple more. Let's try to take one from the back. Yep.
I wondered for Ben how physical the role became. Were you doing all those stunts? What were some of the more difficult ones in the water or backpacking, or how you handled it?
Yeah, I have an incredible stuntman named Greg Fitzpatrick.
I did a lot of
I did a lot, but Greg is amazing. Greg and I have been working together for like 10 years or something. But honestly, I did as much as I could do that I felt like I could actually do. So like we got in the water for real in Iceland. I didn't jump out of the actual helicopter. That was Greg. But we did get in the real water in Iceland with the boat there, and it was definitely, I felt like I was doing something. And then we were up there doing a lot of those hiking shots, all that stuff up on the glaciers and stuff. And the skateboarding, I got on the skateboard too. And but then we had great skateboard doubles too, who did like the big serious stuff. But it was, it was incredibly exciting to be a part of that and to have an opportunity to do that stuff. And at one point I had to do a shot in the water where the boat, it was a POV of the boat coming at me in the water, and so the camera was in the boat, so the boat had to go away to shoot the shot. So they dropped me in the water and the boat went away. And I was just in the water in the North Sea, like with nobody around me, like 5-foot swells, and I had that moment of like, okay, this is a movie, but this is also real life, and there really could be a shark there. And it was great. That was like, I thought that was one of those moments. I thought, I'd never in a million years have a chance to do something like this if I didn't have the opportunity to make this movie. So that was.
There's a lot of rickety old doorless helicopter rides.
The helicopter
too.
stuff was all real.
Over water.
That helicopter. Jeff found this 50-year-old helicopter
Sitting in a
is actually
yard somewhere.
It's the original Hawaii 5-0 helicopter. Dano wrote it.
Literally, the actual one that was in the first series.
So, and the helicopter pilot kept on saying, "Man, I wish this thing had more power." Which is not what you want to hear.
I was scared just being underneath the helicopter.
Yeah, no, it was definitely like it was. So, but it all felt very real a lot, and I think that all helps the actors. It helped me as an actor, but just helped everybody to feel like it was more, it's actually happening.
Last question. Yeah.
This question is for Ben and Kristen. As a director for Ben, how do you go about tackling so many different stories? I'm so impressed with you as a director because you do things like Tropic Thunder and then you do something like this. So what inspires you to keep doing different types of material? And for both of you, how is the chemistry made so believable in such a short period of time? What did you have to do that?
We had an affair.
8 hours of love.
It was good. It was good for a while.
I'm like, this isn't working. Well, no, Ben hosted SNL when I was there, and I think that's when we really first met and started working together. And I think it was right after that was when we met about the movie. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, on the directing thing, I love directing movies. I love movies. So, Tropic Thunder. Every movie has its own story, and Tropic Thunder was something that Justin Theroux and I had been working on for about 8 years. An idea because I had the idea when I was working in a movie in Empire of the Sun in 1987, and was an extra in a war movie, and it had been sort of percolating for a while. And for me, I don't look at it thematically. I just kind of look at what is exciting and it seems engaging and somehow connects. It's something I would want to see it as a movie. I think that's really important. And this movie, I really was the kind of movie that I would love to see. And then the idea of the process of making it, because it is a long process. What is going to keep you engaged? What's going to excite you enough that you're going to see it through for the the number of years you have to? And so that's how it works. I think it's sort of just a very personal thing.
It was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for coming. And
thank you very much.